welcome back to my channel. I'm the Redheaded Witch. One of the main questions that I get on my platforms is about book recommendations. I thought a really fun way to show some of my books from my library by explaining to you and kind of telling the story of my personal practice. Starting with what books did I start with, and then how did it lead me into the books that I'm currently reading now. I think this is a really great example when it comes to realizing how much your practice is going to shift based on what you read, what resonates with you, what you're interested in more. This obviously inspires and sparks something within you to further your research about a particular topic. It also inspires you to incorporate certain methods into your personal practice, and so on and so forth, and all of a sudden you are developing this practice that did not look like anything when you first started. I think that if you're a beginner witch and you are just now kind of trying to figure out where do I start, I think some of these books are going to be super helpful. You can kind of decide for yourself if they are something that resonate with you, but I do think that they're going to be helpful into deciding whether or not they do resonate and if that is a certain path that you're interested in. So I will go ahead and say that I don't have all of the books that I have read at physical copies. I have read some of them on Scribd, which is a monthly subscription library. It's about $10 a month. So if you're limited to like a budget and aren't able to essentially purchase all of the physical copies, just know that that is available to you, and it is something that is more budget friendly. Now, the first book that I actually encountered when I took interest into spirituality and occultism was Scott Cunningham. I believe it was his Earth, Air, Fire, and Water book. This was a book that I first encountered thinking that Wicca or Wiccans were, you know, the same as witches. Obviously, that's something that isn't necessarily true. Not every Wiccans are witches and not every witches are Wiccans. But that was my first encounter. That essentially was kind of when I started to think, maybe I'm Wiccan. And that's why I had started to include the Wheel of the Year into my practice. Now, fast forward a few years after that, I really didn't start deepening my practice and really started to research and actually practice witchcraft until a few years after that. The pivotal moments into my personal practice was actually losing someone really close to me. And so for me, you know, experiencing that loss, had a lot of experiences following after that. I grew up as a Southern Baptist, but despite that, my mom was actually and is a spiritual person as well. So she had an oracle deck around. We always read our astrology, like our horoscopes, every single day. And I also had that one aunt who was very nature driven and inspired by nature, talking to me about fairies. As a kid, I was truly inspired by nature and had this really strong connection to it. But being raised as a Southern Baptist, I never even imagined or knew anything about paganism. So when I really started to further my research, I was really keen on working with plants. Nature is such a huge influence, obviously being a pagan. It really is my happy place. It really does bring me a lot of peace and joy, and it's very grounding for me. And so that's what sparked my interest into learning herbalism, and so therefore I went down what some would say like a green witchery practice. Now I have the Scott Cunningham's magical herbs, and so this was my first purchase essentially of deepening my practice and getting a better understanding of working with plants and herbs within my witchcraft practice. A great starting point when it comes to the magical properties of herbs and plants. There is quite a few plants listed in here and their magical properties, folk names, the planet correspondence, the elements, the powers, you know, what energies does the plant have, and also magical uses. So this was a great starting point when I started to research the magical correspondences of herbs that I could easily gain access to, either by buying them at the local grocery store, or they were already in my kitchen, or I could find them locally in my neighborhood. So then that led me to Blackthorn's Botanical Magic, the Green Witch's Guide to Essential Oils for Spellcraft, Ritual, and Healing. And this felt so aligned with what I was really interested in, because I was in a healing season of my life when I was like, oh, I would love to further my research into herbalism and studying the energies, as well as like maybe even medicinal medicinally. I had come across the ever popular The Green Witch by Erin Murphy Hiscock. I actually never finished this book, which is kind of interesting why I did. Oh no, I did read part 2 of like the path of the Green Witch, you know, composting, essentially being environmentally friendly. And that's also something really important to me too. As a pagan, you know, we want to take care of the earth as much as it takes care of us. You know, we have a lot to repair. So that was really important to me as well. I will say a good alternative that I don't have a physical copy of the book is Plant Witchery by Julia Diaz. So that's where I started. I started with plants. It was something that felt really good to me. It resonated with me and keyed my interest into herbalism. That's when I invested in an herbalism course through the Center of Excellence, I think it is. It is something that I'm still working on slowly, having a full-time job and then also doing like my small business on the side. It's been taking quite some time to finish it, but it's something that I never gave up on, and it's something that I continue to do. I've actually taken a class recently by an herbalist teacher here in Washington, and it was amazing. There's so many plants that I had no idea were native over here, and I really enjoy learning more about them, how to use them medicinally and then magically too. From there, where did autumn go? Like, what happened? That's when I had a little bit of a reflection on my path. I wanted to add more depth, and one way that I knew how to do that for myself was to research my ancestors. And that was a pivotal moment in my practice. And this is why when other practitioners ask me where do I start, I always recommend, like, you know, get in touch with your ancestors or do some research on your ancestors if you're able. I believe I have an older video about that, but I'm going to remake a new one because there's some further insight that I've gained over the years. That allowed me to beliefs that really, and traditions that really resonated with me. And it felt like I was coming home to myself. So my husband had gifted me a ancestry DNA test because I was so interested and I felt comfortable with it. It's like I was hungry for something. And so when I got my results back and I started to look into my ancestry, I was like a whole new world. Like, I opened my eyes to a whole new world and I was like, this feels so right to me. So where did I go from here? This was when my love for buying books and like physical copies of books was born. I had purchased Backwoods Witchcraft and then New World Witchery by Corey Thomas Hutchison, which is a trove of North American folk magic. This was such a pivotal moment in my practice because it just truly resonated with me, and I loved the old traditions and the stories that were being passed down, and some of them, when I was doing my research, were things that I had always done in my family and were beliefs that my family had despite us being raised as Southern Baptist. And so it made a lot of sense to me and it really resonated with me. Then that's when I purchased Folk Witchcraft, A Guide to Lore, Land, and the Familiar Spirit for the Solitary Practitioner. That's when I found my practice. That's when I was like connecting to the land, connecting to the spirits of the land, connecting to the stories of the land, where I currently live and where my ancestors were from. And what were their traditions? What were their holidays? What did they do for these holidays? And how I have spiraled down into my current research. Now, New World Witchery is really great, especially if you live in North America, because it does provide a lot of folk magic from different areas in North America. And though it's very interesting to research the folk magic of places in Europe, of our families, or other parts of the world that can really help us reconnect, I believe that there's importance into also researching the folk magic that lives in where we currently reside. Now, obviously, that also comes with some package of recognizing where these beliefs stem from and who they stem from. And so that's when a lot of work can be done to reassure that we're not appropriating any other culture. So from that point, where did I go? I bought and read The Crooked Path, An Introduction to Traditional Witchcraft. And I would say like these two books were super helpful for me to essentially find the path that resonated with me. Traditional Witchcraft, The Crooked Path, is really great for beginners if this is something that you're interested in. It also includes a lot of helpful rituals that I still incorporate into my practice today. As did the Folk Witchcraft book. It also helped me build that foundation as well. Where do we go from there? Well, because I was really interested in researching about my ancestors, that's where I'm at now. So, I've got The Black Toad by Gemma Gary. I've talked a lot about this book on my channel. So this is also a book that I recommend if you're interested in English folk magic. So essentially from here, I started to research specific areas where my family was from, whether that was from the Appalachian Mountains, England, Scotland, and Ireland. Found was that a lot of the traditions from Scotland, England, and Ireland were actually also found in Appalachian, and that's because a lot of Scottish families and Irish families ended up taking root into the Appalachian Mountains. So I also had gotten the Black Book of Isabel Gowdy and Other Scottish Spells and Charms. So this was when I had started to research the folk magic and witchcraft in Scotland. And then now Ireland is on my list. So this is my newest book, Irish Witchcraft from an Irish Witch. This is next on my list to further my research of the witchcraft that is founded in these areas. Now again, when studying folk magic, you're gonna get super specific about areas within England, Scotland, and Ireland. Aside from this book, and furthering my research of folklore and the stories within Great Britain, I also got a book which was actually recommended to me by someone who commented on my Scottish trip vlog. If you've not seen it, it's a few videos back now. It was last fall, but this book was recommended to someone who had commented, and for whatever reason the comments have disappeared. And I don't understand why, but if this person is watching it, thank you. When we were driving in the Highlands, we took this, country road, and we had pulled over, and someone who was passing us was like leaving as we were pulling in, and they waved, and I was so confused, and I waved back because that's what you do in North Carolina. And I was like, that was really weird. And so that person ended up finding my YouTube video and saying, I saw you, like doing this film and like pulling over, and I thought that you were someone that we knew. I just thought that was the funniest thing. And so since then, I have not, I don't know if they deleted him because maybe they thought it was weird, but I ended up being able to save the books that they recommended, because they were like, oh, if you're really interested in Scottish folklore, here's some books that I recommend. Was The Gaelic Otherworld by John Gregerson Campbells. John Gregerson Campbells is a famous folklorist. This is Superstitions of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland and Witchcraft and Second Sight in the Highlands and Islands. This is where I'm at now. It's just studying the witchcraft and the traditions of these areas. What traditions do they have? What folk magic and superstitions did they believe in? And what are some that I have already believed in myself just from my own family and my neighbors and community? Something new that I can learn, and why did they do it? And what were the results, and then trying it for myself, and what are the results if I try it? These are two other books that I accidentally left out when it came to furthering my research of English magic. So I've talked about Popular Magic, Cunning Folk, and English History before, by Owen Davies. Very good about the history of Cunning Folk within England. It actually tells you about some trials and just the laws that have happened. Very good insight. And then the Book of English Magic is also very good when it comes to like superstitions, magic that was found across England. So without diving into every single book that I have read, that is essentially my path. I thought that would be pretty fun to kind of look back for myself too. I was like, you know what, that would be a really interesting way to kind of see how my research ended up like blossoming and what piqued my interest. Like I said, like finding out about my ancestry, and when I started venerating my ancestors, now there is one book that I don't physically have, and that's because I read it on Scribes. It's by Mallory Voudois, and it's like ancestors, venerating ancestors. My phone's dead right now, otherwise I'd double check. After I was in this stage of my life, I read that book, and that was because I was waiting for my ancestry, like DNA results. I read that book, I was like, this really resonates with me. And because I was also in the midst of ancestral, you know, I'm in the midst, you're always healing. But I mean, when I really started to take a look at my family history and the healing, started to venerate my ancestors, to have that relationship with them and to start that connection and that healing process. And then when I got my results back, that's when I started diving into folk witchcraft and a traditional witchcraft practice. And that's kind of where I found myself today. That's my practice. And I don't know how else to say that. When you start off a certain way, don't expect to always have that same path. Your practice can shift and change so quickly, or so slowly. It totally depends on you. It's everyone's practice and everyone's path is gonna look different. So I hope this was fun for you. It was fun for me. And if you have any further questions, or maybe you want me to talk about a particular book more in depth, please let me know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much for joining me. This was fun, and I'll see you in the next one.